racism, sexism, now ageism. This evening, St. Hilda's initiates a series of forums exploring the challenges of ageism. Giving weight to this topic is the fact that in little more than 15 years, more than 1 in 4 Canadians will be 65 years of age or older. The implications are significant for our labor force, healthcare system, social and physical infrastructure, intergenerational relations, and public policy, to identify but a few of the many areas that will be deeply impacted by this looming demographic tsunami. Good evening, I'm Canon Derwin Shea, and on behalf of the Board of Directors of St. Hilda's Towers and the Wardens of St. Hilda's Church, it gives me great pleasure to welcome everyone to this first of 4 special forums we will be hosting throughout the year, addressing the issue of ageism in our society. This evening, our specific focus will center upon breaking through the barriers of ageism. To help focus our thoughts, we are delighted to welcome the noted author and distinguished host of TVO, The Agenda, Mr. Steve Paikin. Thank God it says here applause. Mr. Paikin will host the panel's discussion and the question period that will follow. Throughout this year, each of our 4 forums will address various aspects of aging and ageism. And each forum will present various panelists chosen specifically for their expertise in the topic at hand. This evening, our inaugural panel reflects considerable experience and opinion appropriate to our topic. Joining Mr. Paikin, we are honored to welcome Dr. Jane Barrett, Secretary General of the International Federation on Aging, Dr. Harold Becker, Medical Director of St. Hilda's Towers, Mr. Fergie Brown, former Mayor of the City of York and member of the Metropolitan Toronto Council and a self-admitted octogenarian. Dr. Michael Gordon, Medical Program Director of Palliative Care at Baycrest Geriatric Healthcare Centre and Professor of Medicine at the University of Toronto. Mr. Jean-Guy Solier, who is the Chair of the National Seniors Council, who has flown down from Ottawa specifically for this forum. Now, if you notice him slip away at 8:45, it is only to rush to the Allen Airport for a return flight to Ottawa in order to attend an important meeting first thing in the morning. So we appreciate the interest and effort each member of the panel and its host has made to join us this evening as we begin to explore the very important and sensitive subject of ageism. And as the evening progresses, I invite all members of the audience to make note of questions and to raise them at the appropriate time. Following the presentation, I invite the audience to gather in the meeting room for refreshments and to meet with our panelists informally. And now, Mr. Paikin, I turn this forum over to your capable leadership.
Thank you, Ken Shea. It's so wonderful to see. Oh, you applauded once already. Yeah, I'm going to get a swelled head if you applaud again. Thank you very much. It's good to see so many people in such large numbers out tonight. The weather is not great, and it's terrific that you were all able to make it here. First, I should make just a couple of brief introductory remarks. Number one, while I'm delighted to be here with everybody tonight, I want to say a special hello to Fergie Brown. Because when I was a cub reporter at Toronto City Hall, where Derwin Shea was a city councillor as well, Fergie Brown was one of the guys I used to cover. And that was many years ago. That was a while ago. And it's really great to see him again. And am I allowed to say how old you are?
I told you already, I'm 87.
You told me. He's 87 years old and he's still cooking with gas, so that's a wonderful thing. And Michael Gordon is an occasional guest on the program I do on TVO. Anybody, I should not just assume that everybody knows what I do. I host a program called The Agenda on TVO. Anybody seen it? Can I see a show of hands? Thank goodness. Okay. Sometimes I think it's just my parents watching, so it's good to know there's others. Michael Gordon, whenever I'm always in a suit and a tie and trying to look as respectable as possible, and Michael Gordon always shows up as he is tonight, kind of open neck and more casual than everybody else. So tonight was, I thought, my chance for revenge, where I will show up more casual than him for once. That's why I'm without jacket and tie tonight. We are going to get into this. We've got about an hour, and I'll try and kickstart the discussion with some questions for our panelists tonight. And then about halfway through, you see we've got microphones around the room here, and we also have people who will bring around hand microphones. So at a certain time, I'll ask other people for their questions, and we really want to, this thing works best when everybody's sort of going back and forth, right? So the more interaction we can get from the audience to our panelists, the better a discussion it's going to be. And you're going to forgive me, I'm going to point this out right off the top. I will be doing a bunch of devil's advocate tonight, okay? Because we know what we're here to discuss tonight, and we know, as Derwin Shea says, ageism is an obvious fact in our society. But every now and then I'm going to be a little bit of a smart aleck and a pest and just poke these folks a little bit, just so we're not all necessarily singing out of the same hymn book all the time, and that might make for a more provocative, interesting discussion. So let's get started here. Michael Gordon, how about to you first? There is a widespread belief, I would suggest, in society today that the elderly don't contribute anything useful to society, quote unquote. Bring the microphone nice and close, and if you agree with me, tell me why you think that persists.
Well, the fact that it may persist among some people, like any other belief system, can either be based on experience, or lack of experience, knowledge or lack of knowledge, personal bias. So it's lots of reasons why one might believe that. If you look for the evidence, and being in medicine now, you can't do anything without what's called evidence-based opinions. Most people who study the field of aging would say elders, using the broad sense, elders, whatever number you want to use, I'm one of them. I'm retired, I fulfill certain criteria, contribute enormous amounts to society. They always have, just they contribute them in different ways. So there are contributions in terms of families, social, experience, work, volunteering, child, grandchild care. I mean, there are many domains in which elders contribute to society. I always use the term that our elders are a non-renewable resource, and therefore we should treat them like other non-renewable resources with enormous respect, because when they disappear, they're not readily replaced, other than by other elders, but those that disappear are gone. So we really should do our best to make the best of them, because they have a lot to contribute.
Jane Barrett, that's a wonderful sentiment, but the reality is a good chunk of society doesn't believe that. They believe that so-called elderly people aren't useful in our society. Where does this come from?
Well, one of the sources, Steve, is from the industry that you're employed in, from the media. Because words such as elderly, oldies, have a negative connotation in some societies, and that's linked with frailty, incompetence and vulnerability. And so some of the ways in which we are perpetuating the terms of ageism and the fact that there's a misperception about the contribution older adults make is about the propaganda and the words that we use. Another example, Steve, is demographic tsunami. And with great respect to Reverend, what does the word tsunami conjure up in ourselves? It conjures up, this tragedy, this death, this morbidity. One day, I'm going to look towards the mountains and see millions of older people walking over the hill, because that, in my mind, is what a tsunami looks like. So we, as a society, need to really dig deeply into our own behaviours and attitudes.
I'm not going to speak for him, but my assumption was that he used that term, and maybe Harold Becker, you can pick up on this, as it relates to the notion that this is something we had better get ourselves prepared for, or else. That's fair to say, is it not? Hold the mic nice and close while you action.
Well, I guess ageism is better than no ageism at all. So it depends on your perspective and how you look at it. We're all going to require more and more care if we live longer and longer. And the statistic is that half of the healthcare system is used in spending to keep people alive the last year of their life. And nobody in their right mind would tick the box and say, yeah, that's a good idea. So, in terms of fiscal responsibility, I think getting older is not the greatest idea, notwithstanding that the older people provide the wisdom and
the elder excellence in our society. So it's a bit of a conundrum. It doesn't have a quick answer.
Jean-Guy, obviously words are important, so why don't we agree at this point what the right word to use is? I said elderly. You want to use a better word, or is there something we should be saying instead?
In English or French?
Comme vous voulez, monsieur.
I don't know. Am I aging? Everybody's aging from day one. I think in answer to, I was listening to all the question, who's responsible for this?
Hold the mic a little closer if you can. I'm going to ask, everybody who speaks has got to have the mic nice and close.
Is that all right now?
Yeah.
Okay. I was listening to all the answers, who's responsible for ageism. The media certainly is projecting an image of aging. But when you talk about aging, you're about older people. Maybe that is the word that we should be using. A lot of people use experienced people as opposed to older people. When I look at my parents, they were all through their life preparing to become elderly. They had stages. Both my parents died in their 90s, so they stayed on for a long time. I don't have that attitude. I'm a senior, legally a senior. You get my black card from the government that says that you're a senior. But I don't, what does that mean? I don't feel any different than I was 20 years ago. But I do have that black card. That means nothing to me.
What does that mean? Does that mean you're 65?
Yeah, I'm 67.
You're 67?
Yes.
Everybody up there looks way younger than they really are. I'm impressed. That's good.
Yeah.
I've purposely left Fergie Brown to the end here, and somebody give Fergie a mic because, what was you are our most experienced panelist this evening, Fergie, I guess is the best way to put this. And I want to know, first from a personal standpoint, do you experience ageism in your everyday life in this city?
Well, I don't know much else, Steve, because I guess I was eligible for my old age pension before I became the mayor. So when I became the mayor, they were foolish enough to elect an old senior as the mayor, and you know that's now 22 years ago that I've enjoyed being a senior, and I have volunteered pretty well every day since that time. I've seen a lot of seniors in action. In fact, most of the volunteers I see are seniors or just within a few years of it, and I think that's great. And I've experienced a lot of ups and downs, I guess, from the time I was in the service during the war and saw what people did there. But just in the last few years, I have so much more respect for caregivers. And I was being a caregiver for the last couple of years. Marjorie just entered long-term care about a month ago with Alzheimer's. And you know, it's a tough road. And when I get in that ward of wherever Marjorie is, and I see these people, you know, who all had wonderful, most had wonderful lives, and some of them you would recognize their names. They have me visible. And the people who look after them, and the volunteers who come there, are just wonderful. And most of them are our age of us on the panel.
Michael Gordon, let me ask you to pick up on the checklist that you made at the beginning of this evening. Because, you know, people do the calculation in society. They wonder whether or not people with more experience, the elderly, call them what you will, whether they are a net burden versus net contributor to society. We've heard you, we've heard Fergie talk about, well, you know, most of the volunteers out there, many of them seem to be people who are over the age of 65. But if you did the calculus, what would you come up with?
Yeah, I'm not sure how you would actually do the calculus. I mean, beyond being older, I'll use the word older rather than old, we all bring different things to our lives and to society throughout our lifetimes. There are some people who are young, and you might say make no, in quotes, contribution that's palpable. And there are older people who make many contributions, and there are those who don't. So you have to be careful about generalizations. The only generalizations you can make are, you know, looking at numbers, trying to anticipate what that means for society. I could take the position, if I want to be a contrarian, and say, well, to me, ageism brings the opposite picture. There are people who think all old people are wonderful, dear, smart, caring, loving people by nature of being older. I know a lot of very miserable old people, and if you ask their children, they'll say they've been miserable all their life. Why should that change?
So nothing to do with their age,
So
just the way they are.
age is just a component of who you are. Now, again, for those of us who deal with this as part of our livelihood, my view is you make the best of the individual, whoever they are, at whatever age, and see what you can do to help them fulfill the best parts of them. But some of them are not great contributors, and others are marvelous contributors, but that, in many ways, reflects the way they've been throughout their lives.
Sure. Jane, you want to speak to that, whether or not this perception that many people have, that the older people are more of a net burden than a net contribution to society, is accurate?
Look, I'm the ever optimist, ever eternal optimist. So, you know, I would say that as human beings, what we're talking about is the net contribution. But it's about what we value as a society and who values it. So sometimes we're actually not going to understand or appreciate the contribution a single person makes, regardless of their age. And I think if we take age out of this conversation about contribution, it doesn't make it any different. And I think that's what we're here to talk about. You know, when do we put the lens of ageing on to look at a situation, and when do we take it off? Governments, on the other hand, want to know the social and economic contribution of people, older people. And that's a whole different conversation.
Okay. Now, Rob, do you want to pick up on that conversation? Isn't that their job to be responsible for that kind of conversation?
My mother, who only lived to 57, used to tell me that the value of a person's life was dependent on how long their funeral procession was. and to a degree, that's sort of reflecting some level of contribution or making a difference in people's lives, that they would bother to come to a funeral. I can tell you that everyone in this room, if they're fortunate enough to have family and children and grandchildren, each one of us makes an enormous contribution to those people immediately next to us. And my grandchildren, I'm a very important part of their life. And so one has to look and parse each one of our lives in that context. In terms of society, that may be too broad a stroke to be looking at whether we're contributing effectively.
Pass the mic to Fergie, if you would, and I want to get him on this one. Do you think that there are, do people of the younger generation sometimes discriminate against people of the older generation because they're afraid that's their future, and they may not like the look of it? How much of that is part of this conversation tonight?
Well, I guess I'm spending too much of my time with older people. You know, I could tell you about my grandchildren, but that wouldn't be fair. And they certainly appreciate all the older members of the family. But generally speaking, I don't know. When I was young, you know, we were taught in our generation to have a lot of respect for our seniors. I think maybe a little bit of that is missing these days, but that certainly all comes back to being at home and how you're brought up and how you're taught. And I just hope that the next generation can do, you know, reassume it. And I think even younger people are changing a lot. And perhaps it's from communication like your end and good programming, and there's a lot of junk on the airwaves and on there, but I think good solid programming, and it could improve a lot to give these youngsters a little lift into how they look at things around.
Junkie, is there a lot of fear among the younger generation when they see, you know, my mother has this expression, getting older is not for sissies. You know, things happen to your body, stuff breaks down.
Well, that's aging, and I mean, you can't hide the fact that we are all aging. You have to accept the fact that this will happen one day or the other. You try to live your life so that this happens later than sooner. I just want to pick up on a point that Dr. Gordon made about the contribution of older people. When we went across the country to do discussions, roundtable discussion, we specifically asked the question, when you retire, do you contribute more to society than before retirement? And the answer was no. The answer was we continue on contributing the way we were contributing as volunteers in our work in society as we were before we retired. The only change was that there were a lot of women that worked at home and did not have a chance to contribute to society the way they could, because they were taking care of children, they were at home, taking care of business. And they tended to volunteer a little bit more than previous to retirement. So that is an important thing. People continue. Aging doesn't mean that you stop doing things. You continue doing the other things. What we haven't learned is how to adapt what we were doing in the past when we were younger to, recognizing that we are not as able to do the same things as we grow older.
Sure. Jane Barrett, maybe you can pick up on the media angle that you talked about earlier. Obviously, the media have a role to play in all this, and they reflect society in many ways back to itself. If there is ageism in society, and if people don't have as positive a view of the contribution made by older people in society as you would like, do you guys have to make a better case for getting older? Is that part of what's going on here?
I wish I could make a case for not getting older, but the game is that we start aging at birth, and at some stage during the lifespan, we die. That's what I understand. And so, what we need to appreciate is that this is the lifespan. But at 20, did I know what it was going to feel like at 50 or 60 or 70? No, because we live in the moment. And that's what we need to do. But what we need to appreciate is that older people, whatever chronological age you want to put to it, are not all vulnerable and frail and burdensome. They're part of society. And every time you speak to an older person, you're making a contribution to their life just the same as they are to your life. So I like to break it down into something really simple, stupid, and that is that every person, regardless of your age, has a value to society and the community and the person next door. So it seems it's a bit more simple.
Michael, we'll pick up on that?
Yeah, no, I wanted to pick up, on the point we were focusing on before about younger people and their view of aging. And I think I've looked at it from the point of people who go into healthcare and why some people have difficulty relating to their older, we'll say patients, because that's in healthcare, that's how they get called, and others don't. And there have been a number of studies done in the World Health Organization that has demonstrated that those who've had exposure and real-life experience in their developmental years of an older person, I use the word as a real person, as an important person, are more likely to relate to the older population, whether as patients or clients or whatever, in a positive way, because they have not, in a sense, been alienated from the concept of aging as opposed to the reality, the human reality of aging. And because, especially in North America, we are a very mobile society, and there's a big tendency for people to move out of their home, their nuclear family, so they don't get that experience of being with older people as they are aging and having that influence. So I look at myself as being very lucky. But I wasn't lucky because anybody planned it. We were poor. And I shared a bedroom with my maternal grandmother and my sister until I was 12. Because that was the only place in the house that 3 of us could sleep, because my parents were sleeping in the living room.
What insight do you think you got from that?
Well, my grandmother, who was a very wonderful person, told me stories. And because of the stories I heard throughout my developmental years, I had a sense of her world, her immigrant world, her coming to America world, her working in the garment. I mean, at the time I didn't appreciate it, but it had a profound impact on me and what I ended up doing, not directly, but my appreciation that I knew. She wasn't that old when she died, but I knew an older person as a real important person. She made me lunch, she made me supper, and she told me stories. And I think that's a key component of how people look at the older population, if they can relate it to my grandmother is one of those older populations.
You follow up with Harold on that one. Do you think the younger generation today, just because of this very reason, doesn't have as much exposure to older people today, and therefore the miscommunication gets worse, the ageism gets worse? Does that all contribute to it?
That's an excellent point, actually. I grew up with my grandmother, too, living in my house, although I don't have the same memories that Michael has. We didn't share those stories, but she existed in my world, and it was very natural. And here I wound up working with seniors in my career as well. I was very impressed working at St. Hilda's. I've been here for about 35 years now, and I've watched the aging of the population of St. Hilda's, which started as a retirement home and now is basically an assisted living facility. It's quite a different place now than it was. And I've always been so impressed with the kaleidoscope of lives and people that I've met here individually. And there's general stories, but there's always the individuals that stand out. I remember asking, I used to have lunch or dinner rather with the residents' council here on a regular basis. I don't anymore, but I used to go around the table and ask, one of my favorite things every year was different council, what was the best year? And we get this answer, well, when I was 73, that was a really good year, something like that. And one woman really struck me. She said, every year is better than the last. And she was in her 80s, and I was in my 40s at the time, and I said, wow, that's really interesting, you know.
Why did she say that?
I didn't really challenge her on that. I just was so struck by it.
Because it goes against conventional wisdom.
Yeah. But it was a great hope of working here and watching people grow older here. It was a wonderful hope for me and as I got older too.
Part of it, I guess, Fergie, if you could pull the mic close, part of it is that there probably is an assumption by the younger generation that as you get older, you can't do anything anymore. And I know that my kids look at me and I'm already 50. I feel actually kind of young in this room, although when I'm at work I feel much older than everybody else. But at 50, my kids think I'm ancient, and they can't believe I'm still playing hockey. Fergie, what are you still doing that we need to know about that people would assume a man of 87 can't do anymore? And keep it Disney.
Well, you know, the last year and a half, I've been so focused on my wife Marjorie with her condition that, you know, I've sort of pulled back on my volunteerism. But as you know, if you just want a laundry list, I mean, I was on the board here for a number of years. Derwin's still trying to get me to come back, and I still think I have some gas left. I could come back. But I'm life member, or life director of the Baker Center over here, and I'm even joined the group at the Family Council now at West Park. My wife's only been there a month. And of course, then I have my military Legion branch that I help. And, you know, I could go on and on. I'm busy. It's every day since you kicked me out here as mayor. And that's, what, 16 years ago. You know, I've been busy every day. But I do want to just say something. We don't have to worry about the kids. You know, they'll come around. They'll come around to all our age, the people here. I made 2 resolutions this year at 87. And it isn't because I keep putting a lot of things off that I do in the community, but I said I would stop procrastinating, and I said that I would get my life or my time organized. And that's what you have to do, you know. I'm 87, but I know a lot of people older than I in our church. You know, there's half a dozen here and there, friends we have that are older. And you forget the young people, all the people in this room. If they just did that, you're always going to do something. You're going to call that dear old lady down the street, the old lady who hasn't been to church in a while, and all these things. And we can all do it, but we've got to stop procrastinating, and we've got to organize our time. The extraneous stuff, just kick it out and do what's important. And look after these people who are older than you, because I'm sure you know plenty of them.
Jean-Guy, I wonder if part of it is telling those stories. I know just a month or so ago, I bumped into a guy who is 83 years old. He used to be the chief economist in the Robarts government and a former president of York University. And I saw him at an annual event, and he had 2 black eyes. And I said, how'd you get those? And he said, well, I play hockey 4 nights a week, and somebody took some liberties. he said, you should have seen the other guy. He plays on the York University faculty team with guys who are half his age. He's 83, he's still out there playing hockey 3-4 nights a week. Do seniors, do older people have to start getting that image out there?
I think they're there. I really think. So I think the new generation of seniors are refusing ageism, are refusing to be categorized as an age group. They want to be recognized as individuals. They want to live their life, continue their life. So we were talking about ageism. A lot of the responsibility for ageism rests on seniors accepting it. We just accept it. We accept the birthday cards that make fun of older people. We accept the whole sort of commercials on TV. So what if we wanted to accept it? Now, you know, when we talk about older people, we'll talk, you know, people over 80s, people over 90s, people over 70s, people over 60s, and the baby boomers that are turning 65 this year. So we're talking about different people. But I will not accept people categorizing me because of my age. I will accept people that treat me as an individual. I was telling Ken and Shay just a little anecdote just before when I came in this afternoon that I helped move my son from one place to the other, okay? And he was always telling me, well, can you lift this? Can you, are you tired? Do you want me to help you? At the end of the day, my 40-year-old kid was more tired than I was. Okay? The only thing I did, I recognized though that there are certain things I do powerlifting and whatever for exercising. I won't hurt myself. I'm bright enough. I learned that not to hurt myself. So if something was too heavy, I said, no, I'm not going to lift that. But I helped. In fact, if he was wanting to quit, then we went another 2 hours. And he sent me an email the day after saying, how do you feel? I said, well, I went to my fitness class this morning, had a power walk with the dog, had a nice lunch. How about you? I stayed home because it was too tired.
I'm interested though, did you resent him asking me those questions?
No, and I'm surprised because my kids know me, know that I keep in shape and I have a balanced life, and I always that. So I was surprised that he had this image. Where did that come from? Certainly not from me. It came from, you know, he's 67. He's not supposed to do that. But I don't accept that. I'm going to do the things I can do. And when we go across the country and you talk about stories, we hear a lot of stories. And I would encourage you to go and visit our website, the Seniors website. This is not a commercial for the government, not government. The Seniors Council website. We have reports, and our reports always start with what we heard. And what we heard contains stories of what people have told us, and there are hundreds of stories of the one I just told you. Okay? Do not accept ageism. We are very responsible for it. You recall a few years back, there was an attempt to stop indexing of pensions.
Yes.
Remember? There was a whole cohort of white, gray-haired people going on Parliament Hill, and this one lady came to the Prime Minister and he said, you're not going to do that to us. We will not accept it. And the day after, the government changed its policy on the indexing. Do not accept to be cataloged anywhere as an older person. I only accept to be cataloged as yourself.
I bet you Derwin Shea remembers what her name was and what she said.
Yes.
You remember? Her name was Solange Denis, and she said, otherwise, goodbye Charlie Brown. That's what she said at the Brian Mulrooney. Let's try this. Mike Gordon, Ontario Human Rights Code, and this picks up on what Derwin Shea said off the very top. We have an understanding that you can't discriminate against people on the basis of their race or their sexual orientation or where they're from, this kind of thing. Age is in the anti-discrimination code as well. Do you think society takes that discrimination as seriously as all of the others?
I would say probably for the most part, yes. They may not always, people may not always realize that what they're doing or how they're acting may have an ageism component to it, as opposed to other kinds of biases that we have. We have all kinds of biases. We have disability biases. Well, if it's an older person who's disabled, is that ageism or disableism? We may have shortism biases, or, you know, there's all kinds of reasons people view others in a certain way. I think the important thing when it comes to human rights codes and how is that when it comes to public policy or major decisions that affect large numbers of people, it's pretty hard to get away with something that's blatantly against the human rights code, whether it's racism, ageism, sexism, and any of the isms. So I think for the most part, now, does that mean every individual is immune from it? Of course not. In the same way, there are people who have all kinds of biases against all kinds of people, whether it's religion, sexual orientation. You hear this all the time. But that's different from translating it into major public policy or institutional policy. It would be very hard now to get away with, let's say in the world of human resources, that you wouldn't hire somebody who's qualified because they were 52 as opposed to 46.
Sure. Jane Barrett, follow up?
Look, Michael, I have to disagree with you. You know, globally, the rights of older people are being violated every single day. And that's why, you know, there's many member states now that are standing up and saying we need to actually think about a convention on the rights of older people for that very reason. So millions of people don't have social protection. Millions of older people are actually disregarded in crisis situations, and Haiti's a good one. Katrina was another one. You know, we're also seeing in the world today that people that want to remain in the workforce and are 60 and 62 and 65 can no longer remain in the workforce. So once upon a time when I went for a job, you know, the employer could not ask me whether I had children or whether I was expecting to have children. Well, now employers can ask older people how many children they have and how many grandchildren they have. So there are different practices coming into play that I think we just need to be very aware of. You know, access to health services. Every single person has the right to access health services. And I understand that there's priorities and triages and all the rest, but let's not be complacent in thinking that the rights of older people are being protected, because they're not, and they're not in this country, they're not in my country of origin either. I'm sorry to be so vocal, but you know, this is something that we need to be standing up and be ready for.
Can I, since I was...
Please.
First of all, I wasn't referring to the world. I was referring primarily to Canada, which is an imperfect, wonderful country. If you can't figure it out, I'm from the United States. If you want to know what dysfunction is in terms of the delivery of all kinds of services, etc. So I was talking about primarily our world in Canada, and although there are pockets of things, I mean, I've been here now for 35 years, and I've been and worked in many countries in the world. I think we do, with all our warts, my wife uses the word warts, which she describes the negative, we do a phenomenal job in trying to do away with organized, systematic ageism. Are there doctors, for example, who don't like taking older patients? Of course. Except you can't do it in a formal way now. Now, people do it informally, in the same way that there's some people who don't like, name the religion, that kind of person. But that's different from public policy, in the same way that when the anti-retirement legislation came through, most of the universities, and I belong to one of them, made a very, very formal, structured statement, because it affected me that we could no longer include age as a premise for retirement. It was removed completely. To me, that's a phenomenal move, because that was part of it. 65, you retire. Within 1 year, it was no longer acceptable across, I could talk about the academic world, the universities in Canada.
Let me go to Harold on that, because I wonder whether or not that is going to be grist for an increasing generation gap mill in the future, where younger people who may already not feel terrifically kindly towards older people for a bunch of reasons may want to add that to their list. You guys are hanging on to jobs longer, and not in the worst economy in 80 years, not giving us a shot at the jobs.
Well, there's two sides to that. One is we're more experienced and we're smarter than they are.
Nicer. Nicer.
Not necessarily nicer, but nicer.
Just a bias.
But also we're much more expensive than they are. So they have a point. And it depends on the perspective of what you're looking at. If you're looking at the generation of goods and services and smarts keep the old people there. If you're looking at keeping the costs down so we can trade, then get rid of the old people because they're too expensive. And that's in fact happening de facto there. What I did want to talk about was this about the public policy that's been mentioned. I mean, there's public policy all over the place. There's public policy that says that judges have to retire at 70. Then it's not public policy, but hospital policies or surgeons don't operate after a certain age.
Senators at 75?
Some sort.
Senators at 75? Have to retire?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I don't mind the fact that I'm the same age as Jean-Guy, and I don't mind that I get half-price TTC tickets. I don't mind that I can get into movies for a little bit cheaper. I don't mind that I receive some CPP pension that I spent all those years paying into. I don't mind all that. Is that ageism? I don't know. And there is a difference. I would disagree with some of my panelists. There is a difference in aging. I'm not a power weightlifter, and I admire Jean-Guy for that. But I would recommend to my patients who are 80 not to jump out of airplanes like the first George Bush, because that's a really stupid thing to do. And you can break your hip, and then that's the end of it. So why would you do that? What point are you trying to make?
Well, the point he was trying to make was that just because he's 80 years old doesn't mean he can't jump out of planes anymore.
Well, he certainly didn't fulfill the first thing I said about being smarter as you get older, because it's not a good thing to do. The bones are thinner, and the muscles are weaker, and it's much more likely that you would hurt yourself. So, you know.
Fergie, have you ever jumped out of a plane?
Never. It's funny you say that. When I took a shot at the Metro Chairman against Dennis Flynn, and Eddie Luther, who used to fly around in the helicopter for the weather, he said, Fergie, you're a cinch to get in. He said, you know, Dennis was a paratrooper. He said, who would ever vote for a guy who jumped voluntarily out of an airplane? But Dennis won, of course.
Do you think, in your experience, Fergie, have you noticed that healthcare providers are lacking a certain something in dealing with patients the older they get?
No, not that we're talking about the elderly patients. I hate harking back to my own experience. It hasn't been that much, except with margarine. And even in a month that we've been with margarine is, you know, I see the ladies there who care for them are sort of forced into it. They're dealing with a person, you know, wake up, you know, to take their food. They have to force feed them. And certainly that's not easy. They all have hearts of gold. They want to do so many things for you, but there's some things that they're forced to do that makes them look as if they don't care about the sense. They're not sensitive to the people, but they really are. It's the only way they can get the job done. So, you know, you can misconstrue a lot of things that professionals do that have to be done, and really at heart they're just wonderful people.
Jane, can I get you to speak to that as well? Because certainly I've talked to doctors over the years who will confess that the geriatric part of the job is the part of the job they're least interested in, and yet that's the part, you know, that, I don't want to use another negative metaphor like ticking time bomb, but that is the part that's going to be an increasingly significant part of their lives going forward.
Yeah, look, I just think it's a tough business to be in aged care, generally. It's a tough business, whether you're a person that's requiring care or a person giving care. And I take my hat off to you for caring for your wife. Tough business. So when we're talking about, you know, are they doing the right thing, etc., I think people generally do the best that they can with the knowledge that they've got. You know, do we slip up from time to time? Yes, of course. I think some of the big beefs that I hear from older people is, why do people shout at me? I'm not deaf. Do you think people could just speak a little bit more slowly? I mean, I'm not incompetent, but sometimes it takes me a while to... So it's simple things like that that we make assumptions about, you know, the functions of older people. But you know, look, as I said, I'm an optimist. I really believe that people try and do the very best with what they know. Do we need further training? Absolutely. You know, do we need more specialists like the people on this panel? Absolutely. And that's where we need to have some more commitment from government.
Okay, we've, just to let you know, we've got a microphone here. If anybody wants to ask a question, I'm going to go sort of across the rest of the panelists and get other ideas. If you've got a question, line up here if you like, and we'll get this started. Will you flip that on? Okay, so you be in shape. Let me get this up a little higher because you're a little taller.
Thank you.
And we have also two people. Where are they, Bill? Where are the two people who've got the microphones? Okay, one over here, one over here. So if you've got a question, put your hand up, let them find you, and if you'd rather not come to the mic in the middle of the room here, we can do it that way as well. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, I'm Don Evans. I'm a resident here. I look a lot healthier than I am. I'm 83. I was teaching philosophy and humanities at U of T until I stopped at the end of 2008. But since then I've been radically ill. And a lot of abilities I used to have are now disabilities. Not as badly, not as radically as most of the people here, who are many of them in their 90s. And I think they are being neglected in this discussion, totally neglected, especially by your kind of emphasis, Steve, on how seniors can, in the 80s and 90s, do this, and do this, and do this. I think of there's a magazine we all get here, Forever Young. Well, we can all be forever young, at least until we die, in the sense of young in spirit. But what happens when our disabilities, more and more and more, they predominate? I had a good preparation for coming here, because I was a volunteer at Bridgepoint Hospital with people who had MS in their 30s and 40s. And they have, you might call it premature ageism. Within a few months, I remember being with one woman who, at first she could feed herself, and then in 3 months she couldn't anymore. And I remember her saying to me, and this is the point I want to get to, she said to me, well, Don, I don't think there's anything left for me to do except to learn how to give and receive love. And I thought to myself, boy, I wish I'd heard that. Maybe you heard stories like that, Michael, from your grandmother. But I wish I'd known that when I was 20 and 30 and 40. I also learned how they have a sense of humor about their disability. But again and again, something which would either be humiliating or make you rage at God or whoever made you this way, dealt you such a rotten hand. It's turned into something that you can see as funny.
Don, I don't want to rush you on, but others want to speak. No, but is there a specific question you want for a specific panelist? Or
I think anybody could respond, but maybe Michael, because I felt most in tune with you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm very happy you brought that subject, because over the years I have sat on many organization panels in which this promotion of, in quotes, successful, healthy aging became the new religion. And that often is to the detriment of those of whom there are many, not because they were lazy, mean, stupid, you know. It's not their fault that things happen. Sometimes it is. You say, oh, if they didn't, I don't know, jump outside airplanes or whatever, this wouldn't have happened. They ate too much, they smoked too much, they drank too much, they had too much sex, too little sex, whatever. But there's a negative bias, not to aging so much, it's to those who have failed, in quotes, aging, because they are not the high achievers. We love to talk about the high achievers, the 98-year-old who's marathoning, the 99, but for most people, that's not what the world has for them. And those people also deserve the respect and the care, even if they are not at this point major contributors, other than being recipients of love and memory.
And we can learn from them. That's my point.
Question over here, please. Yes, sir.
Yes. The question to you, I've been moved here from the Caribbean for over 30 years. No, I've been here from the Caribbean for over 30 years, and what I noticed talking to people is they plan their retirement. After a certain age, they plan on going to a retirement home. Would your government think of encouraging older people to stay in their homes and take care of from their homes inside retirement homes? Because they're building more retirement homes in Canada for older people than even the homes that they're building.
Well, I can give you...
Hold the mic nice and close, Pete. Thanks.
I can answer that from a council point of view because we did study a little bit that, and I can give you my personal experience. The great majority of people want to age at home, stay in their own home. My parents did not want, to their detriment, did not want to live outside their own homes, and it was a bad experience for the family. In reviewing this, because we reviewed this, and it comes to all of the council meetings that we have, and the roundtables that we've conducted, people are starting to realize that you have to age at the best place for you. And that's the mindset that seems to be taking over, and hopefully that's how I'm going to feel. If I can stay home, and if I can be not a burden on my family by staying home, but somewhere, and you don't plan this, I don't think, you plan it in the back of your mind, but you don't put it really on a piece of paper. But at somewhere, if I do not want to do to my kids what my parents did to me and to our family, by putting us in a very difficult situation where we had to push them into a long-term care facility. So I don't know if I answered your question. Do you plan for it? I'm planning for it in my own way by ensuring that if I am not capable of staying in my own home, I will not put the burden of staying there on my children and on my family.
Another question over here, please. Yes, ma'am.
Good night. I'm Ageism. I have worked with the federal government since I was 38 years old. I refused to come to age. I love to have my own place. I've lost a couple of my homes as a single parent, raised 7 children of my own. I have 31 in my family, just myself, mother and father. And I'm very disappointed where I've ended up now. I'm very uncomfortable, and I would mind to come and find me a comfortable place where I can feel like I'm at home. Thank you very much. I'm 62 years old. I've been working here since 1971. I came as a resident, as a senior, I would call it, I came as a London immigrant from Jamaica, and I would mind if you could think of that for me, please. I would mind getting a comfortable place to call home. Thank you very much.
Can I ask, ma'am, where's home today? Where is home today?
Well, I like to have my own home.
But where do you live now?
Lost. I have a couple of homes and I lost them because I was fired from my job after working 23 years with the federal government. And now I don't know where I'm going, left or right.
I'm not sure who can respond to this. We have no kind of politicians of accountability here this evening, so I don't know if anybody wants to... I'm not sure what we do with that, ma'am, I'm sorry to say. But we've heard your story, and we thank you for sharing it. Over here? Who's got a mic? Over here, please. Yes, lady in the yellow in the back.
I look upon ageism as a period of life when you grow old. It's like the winter of a person's life after age 75. You don't have to enjoy the winter, but rather live it to its fullest, doing the best you can with what you've got, with God's help. And how can we be helped to do this?
How can you be helped to achieve that which you just described? Okay, who wants to start with that? How can we help her achieve that which she just described? Go ahead, Michael, you start.
Well, that's a very complicated equation, okay? And many people can be involved in that, ranging from family to health, social service, professionals, all kinds of people can be involved. But I think I wanted to use that to go back to the point the gentleman made about, where people should live. And I deal with this every week in my office practice. And the answer is, where people should live depends on their personal, family, social, etc., situation. So I'll give the little anecdote of my own life of where people should live. After my late mother died, my father was determined to live at home in the little bungalow they lived in Brooklyn. Nice little home, very nice place. It was the right size, easy to take care of. However, he refused to get involved in any of the activities that he used to share with my mother, because she was the dynamo, the social dynamo of the family. He refused, and my sister, who's a psychiatric social worker, and I'm a big fancy doctor, could not convince him to do otherwise, including getting any help, and etc. And we watched him over a number of years become increasingly a prisoner in his own home, and the home disintegrate around him. And he disintegrated within the home. And the final straw was we took him out to dinner for his 85th or something birthday, and he asked us how we got to the restaurant. And when we went to the house, talk about a disaster, it was a disaster. And we said to him, for the first time in our life, you have to move, rather than we'd like you to move. And at one point I said, Daddy, there's mouse droppings everywhere. And he said, they're very entertaining, Anyway, he agreed reluctantly to move. My sister lived in Chicago. I lived here. We tried to get him up here years before, and he decided against it because he said the taxes were too high and he'd lose his driving license, neither of which would have been true, but that doesn't matter. He moved to a retirement home in Chicago, initially with great reluctance, and we said it was temporary. Something happened health-wise that changed the equation, and we watched him over the next 5 years, and I'm Jewish, so it's not part of our repertoire, but resurrect. Right? He turned from an isolate into the most sociable, lovable, he was always a lovable man, but lovable in the sense that people in the home loved him.
So the lesson is you should have intervened earlier.
That's right, but it wasn't the right time for him yet. So where people should live depends on many factors, and there isn't a right answer and a wrong, and I get concerned when this new mantra is aging at home. For some people it's right, but I can tell you every week in my office I see disasters because the children promised that they wouldn't move mother, who's now controlling the whole family to their detriment, collective detriment, so that she wouldn't move into a home of some sort.
Understood. Jane, you wanted to add?
I just wanted to go back to the lady's question about how do we? I think many times as we grow older, there's assumptions made about our competence and about our cognitive ability. And quite often we forget as professionals or family to ask what you want to do. And then understand how we can enable you to do that. And I think that if we can start using that kind of dialogue, and I have it in my family too. My sister who decides that mum can't drive to the shop, and in fact she can drive to the shop. And it's about this degree of risk that we're prepared to live with as children, watching our parents grow older. But the keys for me is, let's start asking older people what they want and how can we enable that to happen, if possible.
I think we've got time for one more question, and we have it right over here. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Dr. Michael, I got a kick out of what you were saying earlier. You grew up living in the same bedroom as your grandma.
And sister.
And
sister.
Well, I'm thinking of the elderly here. My grandmother predeceased my grandfather by 11 years, so he came up to dinner every night, 6 nights a week for 11 years, so I got to know him. So I feel that I have a reasonable rapport with the elderly as well. Perhaps there's a portion of our society that is not exposed to the elderly. Is there an opportunity to put the elderly in the classroom? A day a month? I don't know, is it a resource? Something to think about.
I know that I can only talk about my organization, are very involved in a multitude of programs that exposed, I jokingly say we start off with a volunteer program, and I mean really little kids, a volunteer program. In the summer at our organization, there are literally hundreds of youngsters involved, and all the way up. So, and we do a number of programs on the local high schools. So there, and we're not unique in that, we're not the only one, just I know about ours. So there are many ways of getting there, and I think these are important programs, especially for those who don't have the personal experience.
Hi, I'm going to use St. Hilda's as an example in this instance because we have experience with St. Hilda's itself, and this will be, I guess, for Dr. Becca. St. Hilda's has been here for 33 years and started off as a retirement community for, if you will, middle-aged citizens who have just retired and were leaving their homes for one reason or another. Over the years, changes have been made, certainly in the last few years, where you're now advertising that seniors waiting for long-term care and assisted living. So there's been a shift in the structure of St. Hilda's and what they provide. And I believe that this in part is because of changes within the government structure, federal and/or provincial, as to what is available for citizens. And therefore, it means that citizens who need long-term care, if you will, are coming to what effectively was or is a retirement home, and there is now a change in the structure of the home. And I know that this is not only St. Hilda's, it will be right across the...
Let me nudge you towards a question, sir. We're just about out of time. Is there a question coming here?
But the question really is then...
75 years, and now it's about 87 or 88 years. So that 13-year gap has been filled with, yes, probably the government social support to keep people at home, to provide better housing, better funding, better this, better that. It's easier to keep elderly people at home at age 75. They're more active, they stay in their community. So by the time they need St. Hilda's, they're way older. And it's a different population. That's why they appear to be less well, more affirmed. And it's a real challenge for us. My mother, again, it's funny how we're all using our families, it just shows you the importance. My mother was of the generation that feared old folks' homes, and she made my brother and I promise that we'd never send her to an old folks' home, and ironically she got her wish, because she never got old. But that was a belief system that existed back then. It doesn't exist now. I think people are aware that there are residences like St. Hilda's and like Baycrest that take care of people and provide a wonderful, like Michael's father, a wonderful environment to express themselves. So I think that's I have to interrupt that question because I think the real premise there is wrong. I think that if you start with everything beginning at age 85 or 87, it's a whole different ball of wax.
Okay, we're going to let that be the last official word for this evening, but as you know, our guests are going to stick around and have a chance to have more informal conversations with you afterwards. But before we do that, I know you want to join me in thanking them for such a great discussion this evening.
Excuse me, just on behalf of St. Louis Towers, first of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Rod Seifert. I'm Vice Chair of the board, and I too have a black card, so that puts me on the right side of 65. First of all, I'd like to say it's a genuine pleasure to have had the, I can't read without taking my glasses off, to have heard of the good works of all of these panelists. In particular, I want to thank Steve for a fantastic job in moderating the discussion. You know, I read just the other day, a few days ago, about an interesting profile of Steve Paikin, where I think it may have come from G. P. Murray, I can't remember, but I think the thrust of it was that his defining characteristic as a member of the media is his fairness in both in moderating and in commenting on the political situation of the day, which I think by that he was meant that he was antagonistic towards all political parties. And certainly I was very much impressed by the ability of Steve to ask questions in quick succession and keep the interesting content flowing from our panelists. But I think even better than Steve was some of the questions and the comments from our audience tonight, which gave a different insight from some of the questions where Steve was coming from. In particular, bringing out the thoughts that, you know, seniors don't have to be superstars. They don't have to be this 98-year-old marathoner, as Monsieur Soulière mentioned. They can be the ordinary people like we all are, and who, in their own ways, as someone else said in the panel, are looked up to by their families, who have contributed in their own way through their 75 or 85 years of life, in making the community a much better place to live. A big thank you to all of our panel guests, Dr. Barat, Dr. Becker, who I've known for a good number of years, Fergie, who's been a friend of mine for at least 35 years now, I think, Dr. Gordon, and of course Jean-Guy Soulière, who's probably now 10 minutes late for his taxi. If you have to slip away, by all means, do so. I'm rushing this through because of that important flight. But I do want to take the opportunity to mention that we have, as a gesture of our appreciation to both Mr. Paikin and to each of the panelists, we have created and are providing each of you with a donation that you can provide to the charity of your choice. By the way, St. Hilda's Towers Foundation is a registered charity. Unfortunately, we can't backdate receipts to December 31, 2010, but I know you all look hale and hearty, so you'll make it through to next year, so you can take advantage of it. And failing that, your executors can. Again, I want to thank all of you for coming. As Steve mentioned, there is going to be a reception in the back. I believe at least two of the panelists have recently published books, and I'm told that somewhat coincidentally some of their books have shown up, and I'm sure that Mr. Paikin and Dr. Gordon will be happy to autograph their books to your children, or to your relatives, or your friends, or to yourself.
At special St. Hilda's prices.
And it's special St. Hilda's prices. Is that equivalent or just above Amazon?
No, it's below Amazon.
Oh, below Amazon. How can you beat that, ladies and gentlemen? Well, I've overstayed my welcome. Thank you very much. We have over here, we have some little other tokens of our appreciation. So thanks all for the big fans, Steve, and